Well, I'll go ahead and get started here, folks. We have a number of slides to get through, and I want to make sure I can get through all the slides and show you guys those slides. But welcome. This is kind of the guilty pleasure one this afternoon. You know, everybody else is at the really practical one. This is the one that's just kind of fun to talk about. And I'm grateful I have a chance to talk about it. My name is Denis Gardner. I'm the National Register Historian at the Historic Preservation Office. So, you know, folks, if you know anything about the National Register, if you have questions about the National Register, if you're interested in a property and find out if it's eligible for the National Register of Historic Places, that kind of thing just sort of funnels through me. But I was asked, as you know, we just had a restoration of the Capitol, and the Minnesota Historical Society Press wanted to do a book for the grand reopening at the Capitol. We had the grand reopening here about 3 weeks ago or so. And so they asked, you know, I have a history with them. I've written for them before. So they asked me if I would go ahead and write this book. And of course, I you know, I love writing, so I welcome the opportunity to do this. But it was a really fun project to do, and you know, we all know something about the Capitol, and it was interesting to dive into this and really get to learn a lot more about the Capitol. So, you know, what this is pretty informal. You know, I'm going to show a number of different slides. I'm just going to talk about the history of the Capitol and about the restoration. And if you have questions at the end, just hit me up. Okay, so let's start with the prequel. This is actually our first state capitol building. It was built in 1853, which actually makes it the first territorial capital, because Minnesota wasn't actually a state yet. It was a state. We became a state in 1858. So this was our territorial capital, became our state capital. Great revival, you know, a little pedestrian, but it's pretty common for this period of time. The 1850s, Greek revival was a pretty popular type of architecture for civic buildings. Now this building burned down in the early 1880s, and in fact it took part of the Minnesota Historical Society archives with it. So here's our second one, right here. This is about, this is circa 1890, it was built in 1882. It's more of a Victorian type of building, kind of Romanesque. What's interesting about this is that it was too small from the time they opened it up. You know, almost as soon as this thing opened, we started discussing building a third state capitol building. And that third state capitol building would be built, and it'd be built right over in this area here. And of course, here is our third state capitol building and our present state capitol building. This image is from 1906. But the building, for all intents and purposes, was completed in 1905. It wouldn't be final until 1907. They had a few flourishes that they had to finish on the building. But by 1905, the state legislature was in there. They started in January of that year. So it was operational by that point. So what's the design of this building? First of all, let me talk about the designer. A gentleman named Cass Gilbert. And here we see a young Cass, right here, 1880. And here's Cass, a little bit older here. This is circa 1900, so it's during the time that the Capitol was being built, and you can see the footprint of the Capitol right there. And that's his staff. Cass had an office in what's called the Endicott Building, and in downtown St. Paul, right at 4th Street and Robert. It's still down there. You can still go down there and see the two facades of the Endicott Building. He actually designed that building as well. So that's where he is in this image right here on the right. He's in the Endicott Building in his office. Cass Gilbert was actually from Zanesville, Ohio. He and his family moved here from there when he was, I want to say he was like 9 years old at that time. But he ended up, they moved to St. Paul. Cass decided that he wanted to be an architect. And so he ended up going to school at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. In the late 1800s, the MIT was pretty much the only school of architecture around to go to. And so Cass, all the great architects from that time period, that's where they were going. They were going to MIT. And so Cass, he goes to MIT for about a year, and then he goes over to Europe, and he travels around Europe, specifically Italy, France, England, and he was just enamored with European architecture. And of course, European architecture is very classical. It's a very classical type of architecture. Not everywhere, but in a lot of places. And so that would inform his architecture going forward for the rest of his life. He would be very fond of classical architecture. And so he comes back from Europe, and he goes to work for a firm called McKinley & White in New York City, major architectural firm. In time, he ends up coming back to St. Paul. He comes back to St. Paul in about 1883, right around there, and he opens up a practice here, in St. Paul. And he starts lobbying, like so many people, started lobbying for the commission for the Capitol building. And he ultimately was awarded that commission to, there was a number of architects that did on this, but Cass was the one who ended up getting it. And to a degree, he may have gotten it because of this guy here. This is Channing Seabury. Now, Cass Gilbert, he gets a lot of credit. He's always, and he deserves it, he gets a lot of credit with regards to the Capitol. But Channing Seabury ran interference for Cass Gilbert. He was a friend of Cass Gilbert's. In fact, Channing Seabury, if I remember correctly, I think he lived like 2 doors down from Cass's mom. And so when Cass was bidding on wanted the commission for the Capitol building, he maybe Channing had some influence. I don't know, but it's always been a little muddy. But Channing Seabury was he was a major entrepreneur. Well, not so much entrepreneur. He was a wholesale grocer, but he was a very prominent businessman. And he was appointed to be the vice president of the Board of State Capitol Commissioners. Now, these Board of State Capitol Commissioners are the folks that were they were the board that was charged with overseeing the construction of the Capitol. And as vice president, that meant that Channing Seabury did the heavy lifting. Now, the president was actually the governor, but the governor was president sort of ex officio. I mean, he didn't really have. Yes, he was the president, but he didn't really do the practical things, and that was really Cass Gilbert that was doing that. And there was many occasions where, Cass kind of had to butt heads together, to kind of get things to go the way Gilbert wanted them to go, because a lot of times the board may not agree with Gilbert's vision, but Channing Seabury did, and that's what I mean by running interference for Gilbert. So he's a good friend to have for Gilbert. Now, the style of the building itself is actually called Beaux-Arts. Beaux-Arts architecture is drawn from the École des Beaux-Arts, which is a school of art and architecture in France, and it's still around. And at the turn of the 20th century, it was the major school of art and architecture in the world. Anyone was going to the École des Beaux-Arts. Now, interesting that Cass did not himself go there. He went to MIT, but he was still enamored with the school. And when he was over in Paris, he often would visit the school and talk with various students there and understand its design philosophy. Now, Beaux-Arts architecture it's classical. It's very classical, but it's not your typical classicism as we would think of classicism. It's not neoclassical. It's a very garish kind of classicism. So in other words, it's not enough to have a single column. You have to have paired columns. So you see, like we don't just have one column here. We got 2 columns here. It's not enough to just have one pilaster. We've got 2 pilasters. Right up here, we've got a balustrade right through here, like a railing. So nobody's walking up there. But it's another form. It's a sign of Beaux-Arts architecture. It's very garish. It's very decorative. Same thing. You have pediments here with the shield, but it became a very popular type of architecture for civic buildings, and so it wasn't surprising that our Capitol building at the turn of the 20th century was built in a Beaux-Arts style. Now, another characteristic of Beaux-Arts is statuary. So when you go into the Capitol today and you see the 6 statues, they're marking the entablature right here over the entrance. And these 6 statues are supposed to represent mankind's nobler qualities. But I gotta find what they mean. Okay, this makes sense for a civic building, of course. You can demonstrate the nobler qualities or use metaphor to demonstrate them. So left to right, it's wisdom, courage, charity, truth, jurisprudence, and history. But again, that's a very common characteristic of Beaux-Arts architecture. And of course, the The most popular piece of statuary at the Capitol is the quadriga, the golden quadriga. One more thing about design, I thought it was important to mention this. You see the building in the background there, that's the Cathedral of St. Paul. When Gilbert was finishing the design, when he was finishing the construction of his building, the Capitol building, that's right when the construction of the Cathedral of St. Paul was starting. Both of these buildings are Beaux-Arts, so they bookend John Iron Boulevard. They're like Beaux-Arts beauties, bookending either end of this roadway. Now, although they're both Beaux-Arts, the form they take is very different. The shape they take, the massing they take is very different. If you notice, the Capitol is very long. It's kind of long and horizontal, whereas the Cathedral is rather, well, it's been described as like a bulldog sitting on its haunches. But it's whereas the Capitol kind of stretches horizontal, the Cathedral kind of shoots upward. And so that was a distinction that Emmanuel Masquerade, who was the architect of that building, wanted to make with the state capitol. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the construction. So this is the site. This is the original, or the site of the state capitol building. Now, of course, it's not there yet. It's going to be put right in here, right in that area there. This is 1896, so this is just before construction begins. This is Wabasha Street. So if you go to St. Paul today, Wabasha Street isn't there anymore. Now, it lasted there for a long time, even after the Capitol was built, but it's not there right now. They ended up shifting that when they redid the mall. So this is May 1896, and this is groundbreaking right here. You can see Channing Seabury right here. You know, you pause long enough to get the suit coat off, and pause long enough to scoop a shovel of dirt there, and got the photograph, and I think he probably was done at that point. But what's interesting about this image, it's just a sea of male faces. It's just a sea of, I think this right here might be Cass's wife, I think. But that's the only female face I could find in the image. At the bottom right is July 1898. That's when the cornerstone was laid. And former territorial governor Alexander Ramsey officially laid that. So here we see the foundation of the building being built. November 1896, you can see this is all limestone. This is all Minnesota limestone. And you can see how it's circular here. So you know where that is. The rotunda, that's so when you walk into the Capitol building, the circular part of the rotunda, that's where we are right now. We're standing underneath that rotunda. A few more images. Top right is July 1898. So the limestone is down. They've got the limestone down right here. Now this is all Minnesota granite. They're putting Minnesota granite on top of that limestone. And then in October 1898, the same view. Again, limestone here, granite here, white Georgia marble right here. And the marble was a big controversy. Maybe some of you guys have heard this before. The fact that we used white Georgia marble really ticked off a lot of people in Minnesota for a couple of reasons. One, you know, remember now, turn of the 20th century, Civil War's over, but it still kind of informs everybody's memory at that time. And so a lot of folks in Minnesota weren't too happy that we were going down to the south to get marble. But even more than that, you know, there was a lot of stone in Minnesota. You know, why are we going to Georgia to get marble when we can get stone here in Minnesota? Cass Gilbert's argument was that if we used Minnesota stone, our stone tends to be a little darker, you know, than white Georgia marble. And he was afraid that it would look a little somber on this great big civic building. And honestly, I think Cass Gilbert made the right choice. The marble, the white Georgia marble is just gorgeous. And if you, I don't know if you saw the Capitol building before the restoration, you know, it looked okay, but now go look at it now, and it just pops. They cleaned all that stone. It's just this creamy polychromatic swirl, which is a wonderful color for a Capitol building. A few more construction images. At the top right, we're looking at the northeast part of the Capitol, and then at the bottom left, that is the entrance. So what we're looking at here, this is the portico. Okay, and of course not the stairs or anything are there yet. And then this will become the loggia right up here. October 1900, at the top left, we're looking at, they're just about to start work on the dome. And then May of 1901, you can see the drum of the dome is being built. The drum is being completed right here. And of course, the red cast standing there. It's kind of an odd thing. I don't know, maybe that was commonplace for, posing like that. I don't know. I guess I would have looked at the camera. But yeah, so Cass is standing there with the dome in the background, with the drum in the background. And then at the bottom left, they're putting the lid on top of the drum. Winter 1900, 1901, that's the dome. The dome is actually being built there. And those are the workers. And then at the bottom right, again, the dome is being worked on at that point. Those are all rafters. If you look at the dome today, you'll see all the eagles around the dome. That's one of the rafters that they're putting in place. Now, one of the things I wanted to point out is that the dome is actually 3 domes. So when you walk inside the Capitol building, the dome that you actually see when you look up is this hemispherical dome right here. But surrounding that is this cone here. And that's actually what they're doing right here. They're building the cone. And it's made of steel and brick. And that cone rises up and it supports that lantern that sits on the top of the dome. And then what we see from the outside is this exterior part right here, which is the second largest self-supporting marble dome in the world behind St. Peter's in Rome. 1904, on the left, there again, the rotunda is being built. So we're actually looking at the skeleton of the rotunda at this point. And they're putting, if you go into the rotunda and you look up in the second floor of the rotunda, you'll see that there's 8 columns for our Ortonville granite, for our, St. Cloud granite. These are the Ortonville granite columns that they're putting in place right here now. And this is them today. So it's this wonderful lavender shaded granite. Some of the workers that worked on the Capitol building. At the bottom left, that's the Byzance quarry down in Winona. That's where the limestone was quarried. And then at the top right, that gentleman that you see there with his family, this gentleman named is Cassaville Bullard. Cassaville, he was there with 4 of his kids and his wife Addie. He ended up having 10 kids, but a lot of workers came from the southeastern part of the state, or excuse me, the southeastern part of the country to come up here and work on the Capitol. A lot of people from Georgia where we quarried the stone, and many of them were Black Americans. And you have to remember now at this time, who is the highly skilled in the South? Well, it was the folks that used to do, the folks that were slaves that used to do all of the really skilled work. And so that was being passed down from one generation to the next. And so you had all these African Americans in the southeastern part of the country that were doing the craft work. They could be stonemasons, they could be carpenters, they could be iron workers. But they ended up coming up to Minnesota. Many of these folks ended up coming up to Minnesota to work on the Capitol building, and they ended up staying and became Minnesotans. This gentleman that we see here, Cassaville Bullard, he actually came from Tennessee. His mom and dad were slaves. And in fact, Cassaville, when he was raised picking cotton, and he had to take care of his little brother. It's one of the interesting stories. He would have to carry his little brother from one cotton row to the next. He'd send his little brother down. He'd pick one cotton row and swing back down, pick the other cotton row, pick up his brother and carry him down to the next cotton row, and then do it again. And he used to tell his family when he moved that he moved to Minnesota because he was called to work on the Capitol. And Cassaville ended up working on a number of buildings, prominent buildings in St. Paul, not only the Capitol. He worked on Landmark Center in downtown St. Paul. He also worked on the Cathedral of St. Paul. And if I remember correctly, I think he worked on the library as well. And in fact, Cassaville's house is in the National Register of Historic Places. It's still standing in St. Paul. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Minnesota's palace. So the image up at the top left, that's 1905. So the Capitol, again, for all intents and purposes, is done by 1905. Now, there was no formal grand opening for the state capitol. The legislature went in January of 1905, started doing their work. But on June 14th, 1905, that was labeled Flag Day. And in our history, we view that as sort of the grand opening of the Capitol. And what you see happening there is that the Civil War veterans and the Spanish-American War veterans are transferring the regimental battle flags from the old Capitol to the new Capitol. So they're exiting the old Capitol here, and they're going to march 5 blocks to the east to the new Capitol. And the transfer of regimental battle flags had become tradition in Minnesota after the Battle of Gettysburg. You remember the first Capitol building that I showed you, that housed the very first regimental battle flag, and that was from the first Minnesota at Gettysburg. They gave that to the governor after that battle was over, and you know, just to let you know, about 80% of the Minnesotans were lost or wounded at that battle. But that began the tradition of storing the regimental battle flags at the state capitol. So here we're moving all the regimental battle flags to the new state capitol building on Flag Day. Now all of these images that I'm going to show you now that are black and white, they come from two sources. They come from the Western Architect, which is a journal, architectural journal that in 1905, when the Capitol opened, they dedicated an entire issue of the journal to the Minnesota State Capitol. And the other one is from I think it's just called Minnesota State Capitol by a historian named Julie Gauthier. She kind of wrote the very first history of the Minnesota Capitol. But here we can see the rotunda, you know, the first floor at the left, the second floor at the right, and then third floor at the bottom left here. And again, this is right after it opened. At the top left, we are looking at a capitol. You know, here's our column, that's called a capitol right there. But if you're standing on the third floor, you can actually, you know, reach out and touch those capitals. And then in the middle, we're looking through the Capitol building. So I'm not sure exactly what side we're standing on, whether we're standing at the east or west side, but we're actually looking through the rotunda to the other side. And then this is just one of the hallways here. The House of Representatives at the top left. The Senate chamber is at the right, and then we have the governor's reception room at the bottom left. Okay, Capitol art. It's important to note that Beaux-Arts architecture, it's not just statuary that makes up, you know, that's not the only piece of kind of art that makes up Beaux-Arts. Painting is also very important to Beaux-Arts architecture, and of course, Cass Gilbert was going to include lots of murals, lots of paintings. Cass Gilbert himself was an artist. These are a couple of his works. At left is Foscari Palace in Venice, Italy. This is a drawing. This is a pen and ink sketch that Cass Gilbert did. And at right is a watercolor that Gilbert did in 1913. That's Durham Castle. So he wasn't just an architect, he was an artist as well. And that informed his design for the Minnesota State Capitol building. He was going to include a lot of art. In fact, I want to read something here real quick. This is what Cass wrote when he was first doing the Capitol building. Quote, "Nothing will give the building greater distinction or lend more to its educational value and to the evidence of the advancement of civilization and intelligence of the state than the recognition of the arts as represented by the great painters and sculptors of the present day. And I unhesitatingly and strongly recommend that ample provision be made to decorate the building with mural painting and sculpture." Now, Cass, most of the artists were on the East Coast, and he went and found anyone who was one major artist of the day to fill the Capitol with art. And so we had people like Kenyon Cox, Arthur Willett, Elmer Garnsey, Edwin Blashfield, Henry Oliver Walker, Edward Simmons, Douglas Folk, Howard Pyle, and Daniel Chester French. And that's just a few of them that filled in the Capitol building. Again, these images are from the Western Architect, and what we're seeing here is in the rotunda. This is titled "The Civilization of the Northwest." So if you're ever sitting in the rotunda, you'll see this four-panel set, and it explains Minnesota in very romantic terms. It's actually explaining the prosperity of Minnesota in allegory. Again, allegory is romantic metaphor. You know, so we're being told the story of Minnesota in image in this romantic allegory. And this was done by Edward Simmons. Over the Senate entrance, we're seeing the Sacred Flame yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And what's going on here? So here's our Sacred Flame. Again, this is allegory. So the flame is being passed from yesterday, the elderly woman, to today, the middle-aged woman, to the young woman who represents tomorrow. Now, what the flame represents, no one is entirely sure. You know, the flame could be knowledge, it could be thought, it could be being itself. Nobody really knows. It's actually one of my favorites in the Capitol because it kind of leaves you scratching your head a little bit trying to figure out the riddle. And then at the bottom right, that one is the contemplative spirit of the East. And what's being demonstrated there is that the East is, right here, is being viewed as contemplative, whereas the West is being thought of as a place of activeness and advancement. So that kind of represented Minnesota at that time. And in the grand staircases, we have a dozen lunettes. In the east and west grand staircase, there's a dozen lunettes. I only have 4 of them here. And each one of those lunettes represents some aspect of Minnesota, and some industrial aspect, some agricultural aspect of Minnesota. So at top left is that's sewing. At the right is stone cutting. Bottom right is logging, and to the left here is dairy. And again, that's just 4 of the dozen that you will see if you go to the Capitol. There's 6 on each side, at each the western grand staircase. And then in the Senate chamber, what we are looking at here is this is Minnesota Granary to the World, which is not really too much of an exaggeration, because by the 1880s, Minnesota was in fact the millers to the world. Minnesota was the major milling state in the world. And so this image is depicting Minnesota as breadbasket. The Supreme Court chamber, there's actually 4 murals in the Supreme Court chamber. There's just 2 of them here that I'm showing you. At the top right is the recording of the precedents, and that represents that's showing Confucius with a couple of his disciples, and they're sitting near a river, and he's pondering a manuscript that's laid out over his lap. And then at the bottom left is Socrates, and Socrates is at the home of a wealthy family, and he's pontificating about something. I don't know exactly what. And then inside the dome, if you walk into the rotunda and you look up at the very top, you're going to see the 12 zodiacs. In the governor's reception room, we have easel paintings. Now, what I mean by easel paintings is that they're not, easel paintings are movable paintings. Here we have 2 at the bottom is Father had been at the Falls of St. Anthony. At the top right is the Tree of Charles de Sue. These are 2 of the controversial paintings that we heard a lot about over the last year or so. But this is what was placed in the governor's reception room, these 2. And then there were 4 Civil War paintings that were placed in the governor's reception room and the anteroom. There's 2 in the anteroom. There's 4. There's 2 in the anteroom, 4 in the governor's reception room. The top left is the Battle of Missionary Ridge. And then at the bottom right is the Battle of Nashville. And it's important to note that that one at bottom right, that is considered a masterwork. It's completed by a guy named Howard Pyle. That image has actually been included in literally hundreds of publications. And if you visit the Capitol and you're looking at the various Civil War paintings in the governor's reception room, contrast that one with the other ones, and you will see the difference in the talent. You know, I'm not an artist, and even I could see it. The People's House. So, State Capitol Building is not just a place of art and architecture. Of course, it's a place where business gets done, and it's also a place where people rally. You know, if you have to get the government's attention, one of the things you do is you do that at a State Capitol Building. This is 1933. This image is of the Farmers' Holiday Movement. The Farmers' Holiday Association was, not surprisingly, an organization of farmers during the Great Depression that were trying to prevent the sale of farmsteads, from bankrupt farm families. And so here they're rallying at the Capitol, and they're marching into St. Paul, and then they go back towards the Capitol. At the left here, September 16th, 2001, that is the remembrance of September 11th. So this is just 5 days you know, after the Twin Towers went down. So anyway, I just love the image at left there, the mom and the daughter there. And then at the right, we see is January 16, 1978. That is the first Martin Luther King Day. And of course, we celebrate at the Capitol as well. At the bottom left is the 150th anniversary of statehood. So we were firing off firecrackers and, you know, fireworks at that time. And then in 1937, that's the Ice Palace. You know, the St. Paul Air Carnival Ice Palace. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the rehabilitation. So, 100 years go by, and the Capitol's in pretty rough shape. The work that we were doing on the Capitol was very piecemeal. It's reminiscent of, you know, going to Europe and you see the great cathedrals of Europe, and there's always scaffolding. You know, it never goes away. It just moves from one spot to the next. Finally, and you know, this all really kind of came to a head in about 2009. Folks were working on the dome at the Capitol, and they saw just how bad the damage was from water leakage. And then in 2010, one of the Zodiacs, remember I showed you an image of the Zodiac here a little while back, one of the Zodiacs ripped in half and it fell. Fortunately, there was a construction tarp that was strung up because of work going on at the Capitol, at the dome, and it arrested the fall of the painting. But after that, you know, people really started getting alarmed. And then the real iconic image was this image of Dean Erdahl, Representative Dean Erdahl, and he's standing in the House chamber and he's saying, hey, look, you know, he's holding this stone, it's a stone scroll, and that thing had fallen off with just a few taps of a hammer. It had fallen off. Can you imagine if that fell and hit somebody? So he's holding that and he's saying, hey, we got to do something about this. Enough of this piecemeal stuff. We got to fix the Capitol building. And it really ended up being a bipartisan effort. I mean, there was a little wrangling at the beginning, but it really ended up being a bipartisan effort. And you know, the folks, the legislators ponied up to make this rehabilitation possible. It ended up being roughly $310 million, and about $3.5 million of that was for art restoration. So here, you know, the scaffolding goes up outside the Capitol building. We're at the exterior here, and they just cleaned all of this marble. And where it was damaged, where it was so badly damaged, they actually had to replace it. And they went to the St. Georgia quarry, and they got marble from the St. Georgia quarry, and they bring it back up here to Minnesota, and they start replacing some of the stone blocks and some of the flourishes with the new stone. And you can get a better idea of it right here. You can see this gentleman right here. You know, he's working on this akathis right here. This is called akathis. You know, this is the Capitol right here, the Capitol on top of the column. And so you can see the older stone right here, and you can see the newer stuff here. He's working on it here. He's carving that. And then right up here, this is the dome over the Capitol, over the Senate chamber. And they had removed the copper, and there was just so much damage back there, and they had to repair all of this. Inside the building itself, we're in the governor's reception room here. You can see the scaffolding inside the governor's reception room. And then they rewired the whole building. You know, new electrical lines, new fiber optics. They also put in, you know, new HVAC, you know, new plumbing, all kinds of stuff. They went all out on this. They were going to do it all in one shot. This is standing inside the Capitol looking up. So like if you're standing in the rotunda, you're looking all the way up here with scaffolding that ran all the way up to the top of the dome. And here we go, same thing. We're looking up towards the Zodiacs, are up in this area right up here. And the scaffolding, I was fortunate enough to be in there a couple of times. The scaffolding was all the way up to the dome, and then it was through one of the grand staircases, and then they ended up switching it from the one grand staircase over to the other grand staircase, because you still had to have some room to move around in there. So restoring the art. This is Simmons' Civilization of the Northwest. This is the one in the rotunda. This is the 4-panel set in the rotunda. I just wanted to give you an idea of how rough some of this art looked. Now, it doesn't look terrible here when you're looking at it from a distance, but when you get up close, you can see it was looking really rough here. You know, it was aging. It was over a century old. Here it was torn. It's actually torn right here. And so what would end up happening with some of these murals is that they would tear, and a lot of it came about because of water damage. You know, behind the murals would be a white coat of plaster, behind that would be a brown coat of plaster, behind that would be brick. You see this especially up in the dome with the zodiacs. And in some cases, the brick itself was cracked and fractured, and then it fractured those coats of plaster, leading to the murals just wanting to fall right off the wall. And so in this particular case, they had to pull this mural off the wall itself. And here, well, first of all, before you get there, here what they're doing is what's called in-painting. We're still looking at the same mural. They're in-painting, these artists are in-painting, and here's a closer view of that. So when you think of in-painting, don't think of, you know, painting like with your, you know, you're painting your fence. You know, it's not that kind of thing. It's literally a small brush and they're doing dots. Yes. You gotta be very, very patient with this. But in this case, they also had to take this off. They had to take this mural off and send it to the laboratory to have it worked on. So what they end up doing is they take cheesecloth, like a cheesecloth, and they shellac it across the painting. And what that ends up doing, the effect of that is that it stiffens it. You know, it kind of makes it like cardboard in a way. And so then they can get behind it and they can start chiseling that plaster away and start taking that mural off. And here you can see them getting behind there as they're trying to work that off. Now what they did up here, they hung a board, and then they have these strips that come down from that board, and they adhere those strips to that cheesecloth covering. And so then they can just lift it off. And then you can see it right here. So it's kind of laid down right here. Here they're about to lift it off. And then this isn't actually the mural from the previous image, but it gives you an idea of what they did. They would then roll the murals onto these caissons, and then they would package them up, and then they would ship those to the laboratory where they'd be worked on.
Who did the work?
There were a few different, I forget, Page Conservation did the work on the fine art. Michael, I can't remember who did the work on the deck art.
I don't either.
Yeah, but there was two companies. There was a company that did work on the deck art and another company that did the work on the fine art. But here you can see, you get an idea of what it looked like as fractured plaster back here. So they had to fix all of that before they could then, you know, remount the murals. So the mural comes back from the lab, and they were able to, you have to do this very meticulously and put this back up again. This gives you an idea of just how bad some of these paintings were. You can see this is all been cleaned. Here's where it's all been cleaned. But this is what 100 years does to a mural. And it's grime, it's varnish, it's dirt. And they take this off, they try to clean this off with solvents, you know, chemical solvents, but you have to be really, really careful, because if the chemical solvent matches the mural behind it, you can end up wiping the mural away. You don't want to do that. So in some cases, you can't use a chemical solvent. You actually have to use things like dental picks, just like little dental picks, and you're picking off the varnish. Again, it's very, very meticulous work. And I'm going to show you a couple of before and after images. This is actually Howard Pyle's Battle of Nashville. This is before, this is after. And then side by side. Treaty of Traverse de Sioux. And then after. And side by side. And so we're ready for the next century. So here's our brand new rotunda. It's entirely been cleaned and polished and everything here. And you can see we've got the North Star right here, surrounded by another North Star right here. One of the corridors. All of the stenciling has been redone. All the stenciling has all been redone here. Everything has been cleaned. Yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Entirely been cleaned. Much brighter, cleaner than it was. The contemplative spirit, same thing. This is very bright in here today. If you go in here today, these are in the East and West Grand staircases. You stand in there today, it's very bright, it's very, very colorful. Now, again, after 100 years, there was 100 years of stuff on those skylights, and they cleaned all of that off. And here's our various chambers. House at the left, Senate at the right, Supreme Court at the bottom left, and then the governor's reception room at the right. You can see that the paintings aren't back in place yet here. But while I got this image up, one of the interesting aspects of this room, the governor's reception room, the paintings, the frames, are actually built into the wall itself. So when you're looking at them and you're looking at that frame is actually part of the room itself. And then this is how our Capitol looks today. And that's all I have. If you guys have questions, please ask.
I was amazed when you did the beginning about the dome, and that when you're inside and look up, you're not actually looking at the whole dome?
No, you're looking at the hemispherical part of the dome. It's actually 3 domes. It's like a hemispherical dome, then a cone, and then the exterior dome. And there's been water leakage problems with it from the very beginning. I don't know if you can ever fix that problem. Yeah.
But now that that's hemisphere is restored, you can't ever see the inside of the
You
big
can't
dome.
see the, you don't see the cone. You don't see the cone. I'm still trying to talk the site manager into taking me up there.
And in the lower level,
Mhm.
when you're looking, got a picture looking down at the inlay, and then there's all like the caverns. Was that the way it was originally?
Oh, I'm sorry, I gotta go back here. Which one were you thinking of?
Just looking in the rotunda, yeah.
This one here?
Yeah, when you look down, that's into the basement, isn't it?
No, we're looking here, this is where the main part of the rotunda, the first floor part of the rotunda,
Okay.
right here. But yeah, the basement, there's actually a room right underneath there. There's a conference room right underneath there. And this is clear, it's translucent here, so when there's a meeting going on down there, it lights up.
Okay. But, so, and is that where the cafeteria restaurant is on that basement?
Down in the basement area, it's, I don't know if is Rathskeller right in the basement? Is it? Yeah.
Well, but that, there's all the stone columns and
Mhm.
whatever, and it's like that.
Yeah, and you can look up and see the tile ceiling, because it's called Gustavino tiles, named after this guy, Raphael Gustavino, who's an Italian who created this structural tile. And you can see it now. If you go to the basement, the basement used to literally be like a labyrinth. You'd go in, it almost reminded you of sort of like a dungeon in some old, medieval movie kind of thing. But you go down there now, and it's very, very clean and very, very open. You can see the tile, which is really interesting. I'm kind of a technology nerd, so I like that kind of thing. Yes, ma'am.
Why didn't they get rid of that awful green carpeting in the House of Representatives?
In where?
In the, I think it was in the House of Representatives.
On the House of Representatives?
Yes, it's like lime green.
Oh, my guess
Run on
is.
a budget, like that was it, they just couldn't.
Well, what they try to do, and I don't know if they're successful in every case, but you try to adhere to whatever the original was. You try to maintain the historic integrity of the spaces. And so if that was the original, flooring, then you're going to try to adhere to that. You're going to try to retain that integrity of that space. That helps with the integrity of that particular space. Yes.
The paintings that were moved from the governor's reception room up to the Gilbert Library, what was all that controversy and what's the interpretive stuff that's now?
Yeah, that's interesting. So we had a couple of paintings, a few paintings moved out of the governor's reception room. They've been moved up on the 3rd floor to the Cass-Gilbert Library, which is a really interesting space, but it's probably the only library I've ever been into that doesn't have any books. But my understanding is that they're going to be putting some books in there. Just a side note, Gilbert designed the furniture as well. He was in charge of everything. But some pieces of furniture he actually purchased, and one one thing he purchased were these revolving bookcases, which are really wonderful bookcases. 2 of them are up in that Casco library. They're worth the visit just to see those alone, although there's no books there quite yet. But yes, so the idea was that they would take the paintings that were offensive to some folks out of the governor's reception room. The notion was that that probably wasn't the best place for them, especially when the governor's doing a talk or press conference and you have, you know, a painting behind him, that it can be a little offensive. I've been rather agnostic on the issue. What would have bothered me, I think, is if they would have taken those paintings and just buried them away from everybody. They didn't do that. You know, they took the paintings and they put them in the Casco Library, and you can go to the Casco Library, and they're being robustly interpreted now. So there's a lot of interpretive panels up there, and you know, they were always interpreted, but it was usually from kind of one perspective. Now it's multiple perspectives, but they're still there. You can go up there and take a look at it and just read, you know, what folks are saying about it.
Are those the blank spots that the picture showed?
In the governor's reception room?
Just the frame now?
Yep, yeah.
And what were the paintings that were in there?
Oh, well, it was, there was 4 Civil War paintings, and then there were the Treaty of Traverse de Sioux, and then Father Hennepin at the Falls. Okay, and now Treaty of Traverse de Sioux and Father Hennepin at the Falls, those went up to the Casco Library. Now, the 4 Civil War paintings that were there originally will go back there again, but they're going to put different paintings now in those other 2 spots, and I don't know what they will be.
And was the offensive thing that those events were not probably portrayed accurately?
Well, what's interesting is, you know, Treaty of Traverse de Sioux, when you look at that image, the image as sort of a moment in time frozen is pretty accurate. That's a pretty accurate image of how things look. What was bothersome about it is what that image represented. Because signing the Treaty of Traverse de Sioux, it's hard. Native Americans did end up suffering quite a bit because that treaty was broken quite a bit. You know, it kind of affected their culture dramatically, and that's what was kind of offensive, what that represented. With Father Hennepin at the Falls, again, it was one of those images, you know, you have this Dakota woman that's, you know, topless. You know, that didn't happen. You know, they didn't walk around topless. You know, and Father Hennepin is kind of standing up and he's blessing the falls, and the Native Americans are sitting kind of at his feet in a more of a subjugated kind of way. And so that that offended a lot of folks. You know, Douglas Volk, he did Father Hennepin at the Falls. Volk is a good artist, but you know, personally, as a piece of art, I never really thought it was all that impressive. Yes, sir.
You showed those images of some of the art pieces that had been cleaned off and they were really dark, and then they're much lighter now. You said it took 100 years to get that way.
Mm-hmm.
Are they going to look like that again in 100 years, or will the lack of tobacco smoke and allow them to maybe be better looking 100 years from now?
Well, my hope is that they'll take the historic structures report, because there's a historic structures report that was completed for the building, and they'll follow, you know, suggestions in there, and you know, kind of clean things on a regular basis. You know, I should note that the paintings, it wasn't like the paintings had ever been cleaned before. Over that 100 years they had, but it was like, it was by well-meaning folks that did not necessarily have a sense of how to conserve the paintings, and in some cases it was literally water and soap, you know, that was kind of going on there. In other cases, they actually had painters come and try to touch the paintings up, and they actually altered the composition of the painting. You know, in that one image that I was showing that yesterday, today, and tomorrow, there was a section, or was it the Contemplative Spirit? No, I can't remember, but there was a section of drapery hanging over her arm. And at some point in the 30s, the artist that was hired to touch that up, he painted out the folds. He literally changed the folds on it. And so when they were rehabilitating that painting here during this restoration, they had an image of how it originally looked. and they were painting those folds back to the way they originally were.
So they had some images of those paintings going way back far enough.
Yes,
They actually
yeah.
could see the.
You can't always be 100% because you can't always find the image, but in this case they did. Yes, ma'am.
So they couldn't take off the layers of paint he had added to get down to the original?
You can take off some. You can take off some. Again, that's what the chemicals are for. You can use some chemicals to take away some of that overpainting, but you got to be really careful because if you got to be real careful so the chemical doesn't start taking off the mural underneath it. And if they worry that that's what's going to happen, then you can only use the chemicals can only take you so far. Yes, sir.
I know a lot of the artists, when they're painting, will put the color in the varnishes and put 2 or 3 coats in. And a conservator will come in and strip off the varnish, thinking that they can repaint it, but often they can't. You can tell if a painting's been skinned if the eyes don't have any color.
Oh,
That
interesting.
means the varnish has been removed. And the test is when you're stripping off the varnish and cleaning it, if you get any color on your cotton swab, and you're doing a square inch at a time, you stop.
Oh, okay. I did not know that.
It's really meticulous, difficult work.
When I started this, before I started writing the book, and again, I'm not a conservator. I function as a historian. But I was talking to the conservator in our office. I have a really lovely painting at my house of a friar, sipping wine, and it's rather dirty, and I wanted to clean it. And so I go to the conservator and I said, "Oh, hey, Mom, what do I do? How do I clean this?" And he looked at me and he says, "First of all, you don't do anything." And he gave me the phone number of someone. He said, "Stay out of the way, let them do it." Because I would have probably wiped something away.
Were the paintings that were they attached to the wall, or were they painted directly on the wall? Was there a canvas that was glued?
In most cases, they could do it right on the wall. Okay, but there were some cases where the lunettes were in such rough shape, they were literally falling off the wall, or they were torn that they actually had to remove them.
So it was a canvas that was attached
Mm-hmm. It's attached to the plaster.
off the plaster.
And if I remember correctly, that with like the zodiacs, there's 12 zodiacs. I think they had to take 5 of those off.
And then they relined and
Mhm.
reattached.
Mm-hmm.
Often they use a rabbit skin glue and a mulberry paper
Okay.
to solidify the front of it, and they use a grid pattern.
Okay. Yeah, they did use that grid pattern.
And
Yeah.
that consolidates the front. You can take everything off the back and then you put it in the new lining.
Mm-hmm. Michael, did you have something?
Yeah, they were largely painted in New York, and then there was an exhibition in New York before they were shipped over here to be installed in the Capitol. But there's an old photo or 2 of that, and it looked like
So
it
they're
was
all on canvas.
yeah, it looked like an incredible exhibition before they came.
Why do they choose not to take them off and reline?
I'm sorry?
Why did they not reline all of those paintings if they were in rough shape?
Well, I think that, you have to make an analysis with them in place. And, is it worth removing a painting, to try to, realign something if you maybe will cause more damage just by doing that? The idea is you don't want to remove it if you don't have to remove it. Yes?
I learned in the past conference that Cass Gilbert designed the depot in Little Falls,
Mhm.
but what else in Minnesota did he design?
Well, you're right, he did design the depot. One of the really popular ones, one of his major commissions, again, is the Endicott Building. So if you go to downtown St. Paul, right at 4th Street, Robert Street, you'll see this L-shaped building. You'll see the Pioneer Building is right at the intersection, and then this L-shaped building just sort of embraces it. That's the Endicott Building that Cass Gilbert also designed. Of course, you remember Cass ended up going to New York. Actually, during his commission while he was working on the State Capitol Building, he moved out to New York. The State Capitol Building made him a major national player, and so he ends up doing the U.S. Supreme Court and a number of other major buildings in Washington, D.C.
But there aren't any other smaller buildings around Minnesota like that depot?
No, there is. I'd have to take a peek at my list, at my National Register list. Yeah, he did the mall.
He's got
You know,
he's got tons of buildings here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, the mall at the U is going to be listed in the National Register here in November. It's going for the state review board, and that was Gilbert's design as well. It was another Beaux-Arts design.
The Soldiers and Sailors Monument in Duluth in the Civic Center there.
The Cass Gilbert Society has a full list
Oh, yeah.
on their website, so if you go to the internet and search for Cass Gilbert, I don't know that it's complete, but there are many.
You know, in fact, if any of you know Marjorie Pearson, she's here today. Marjorie is the past president, or she the current president, you know, of the Cass Gilbert Society. Anyway, Marjorie's a walking encyclopedia on Cass. You know, she's here. If I see her, I'll point her out and just go nail her, you know.
He did the Woolworth building, the tall, what at
Yes.
the time was the tallest
Mhm.
skyscraper.
And that was kind of-
skyscraper tallest was-
Yeah, if I remember, that was kind of neo-Gothic, wasn't it?
Yeah, I remember. Was that at the same time he was doing that?
No, he did that later, after when he went out to New York.
Okay.
In St. Louis, 1907, the World's Fair building, it's the Fine Arts Museum, the only existing building from that World's Fair. It's still there.
Did he design some of the interior little sculptures and features?
He designed virtually everything.
So you see those little
Yes,
balls of it?
he was in charge of everything, or at least approving of it. Again, virtually every stick of furniture he designed. Not all of it, but virtually every stick he designed. If you guys don't have any more questions, if you are interested in purchasing a book, I do have the books here. We got a 30% discount. Yeah, the MHS Press, at their conferences, they give a 30% discount, so I'm making sure I let everybody know that. So. Yes, ma'am.
Are you signing them?
I can make an X. Thank you.